So this shit happened last week and I'm still riding the high LOL. Fair warning. This is going to be a long one, but worth it if you want to see an ungrateful boomer get what's coming to him. I never post stuff online, but this is too good not to share. I've spent the last decade building my own investment firm that specializes in acquiring distressed companies, turning them around, and either making them profitable or selling off their assets. We're talking seven-figure deals, 23 employees, and a corner office with a view downtown. Not exactly what I'd call failing at life, but apparently my father has different metrics for success. Last Tuesday, I checked my mailbox after getting back from the gym and found this fancy gold-trimmed envelope. Inside was an invitation to my dad's retirement party celebrating his 40 years of excellence at Midwest Regional Development Corp., where he's been an executive since before I was born. But someone, pretty sure it was my brother Colton's idea, had taken a red marker and drawn a big X through my face in the family photo they used on the card. Below that, in big bold letters, "No losers allowed." I stood there in my driveway just processing this childish bullshit. Like, who does that? My dad's always been a hard ass. Nothing was ever good enough, especially after I decided not to follow him into his precious company. When I dropped out of the MBA program he'd forced me into and used my savings to start my own business, he literally told me I was dead to him. That was 12 years ago. For context, my siblings both joined Daddy's company. Colton's the head legal counsel, and Amara runs operations. They've always been the golden children while I was the disappointment who couldn't hack it in a real business, according to my father. The fact that my firm now manages more capital than his entire division does? Irrelevant, apparently. I texted my dad asking what the hell this invitation was supposed to mean. His response, "Why would we want our biggest mistake there? You're not family. Haven't been since you failed at life." Before I could even respond, Colton jumped into the group chat. "Even the janitor at Dad's job has more success than you. At least he shows up every day and doesn't think he's too good for honest work." Then my dad, "Stop texting. You're blocked after this. Don't bother showing up. Security has your photo." I threw my phone across the room and it hit the wall hard enough to crack the screen protector. Whatever. I have people who can fix that shit. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat down at my desk, thinking about all the times my father had humiliated me in front of others, at graduations, family gatherings, even my own birthday parties. Always the same message: I wasn't enough, didn't measure up, wasn't man enough to follow in his footsteps. What these assholes didn't know is that for the past 8 months, I'd been quietly acquiring shares in my father's company through various shell corporations. Their stock had been underperforming and my analytics team flagged them as a potential acquisition target. I originally planned to keep my involvement anonymous, but that plan changed the second I saw that invitation. The night of the party, I opened my laptop and found the Facebook livestream my sister had set up. They were all there in the company's grand ballroom: Dad, Colton, Amara, Mom, who looked uncomfortable as usual, and about 100 colleagues and friends. Everyone raising glasses, patting themselves on the back. My father stood up to give his speech, talking about his legacy and the family business he'd helped build. Then came the toast. "I'm proud of my 2 sons who made something of themselves." Brother raises his glass. "Love you, Dad. Glad I'm your only real son." Sister. "Best father to his actual children." Dad raising his beer. "I did have 3 kids, but one was defective. Had to return it." The crowd fucking exploded laughing like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Some coworker I didn't recognize asked, "What about your other son?" And my dad straight up said, "What other son? I have 2." Like I never existed. Then my brother got up for his speech. "Remember when he said he'd be successful?" And my father, "Still waiting for that miracle." I was seething, gripping my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. But I kept watching because I knew what was coming. At 9:27 p.m., Dad made the big announcement. "Tonight, I'm officially disowning him. My lawyer's here to make it legal." More applause, more laughter. At precisely 9:30 p.m., I watched as the venue's door opened and a courier walked in with a sealed manila envelope marked "Urgent. Open immediately." My special delivery had arrived right on schedule. The live stream had perfect timing. The camera was still on my father as he tore open the envelope, pulling out the documents inside. I wish I could frame the exact moment his smile vanished. Mom gasped loud enough to be heard over the crowd. Colton went pale. Amara dropped her wine glass and it shattered on the floor. Dad was frantically flipping through the papers, his face getting redder by the second. What he was looking at was official documentation showing that I now controlled 37% of the company's voting shares. More than him, more than the other board members, more than anyone. along with a notice of an emergency board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. I included a handwritten note that simply said, "Guess which loser just became your boss? See you Monday, son." Within minutes, my phone erupted. 47 missed calls, texts begging me to answer, voicemails from my father ranging from threats to desperate pleas. Even my mother called for the first time in years, her voice shaking. I turned my phone off and poured another drink, smiling to myself as I imagined the chaos unfolding across town. The party was definitely over, but mine was just beginning. This is already too long, so I'll post an update after the board meeting tomorrow. Trust me, it gets even better. Update 1. Holy shit, you guys. The response to my last post was insane. Didn't expect that many people to care about my family drama, LMAO. Anyway, Monday's board meeting just happened, and I need to dump this somewhere because my head is still spinning. I got to the office at 6:45 a.m., even though the meeting wasn't until 9. Wanted to get there before anyone else, set up in the main conference room, and make them come to me. I brought Julian, my second in command, and Melissa, our finance director, plus 2 lawyers from Hadley and Burke. We spread out our materials across the table, financial reports, acquisition documents, everything. So here's what I never mentioned in my last post. I've actually been monitoring my father's company for almost 3 years. Not because of some master revenge plan. It started as pure business. My analytics team flagged them for concerning debt-to-equity ratios and weird cash flow patterns back in 2022. I kept an eye on them casually at first, the way I tracked dozens of potential acquisitions. But about 8 months ago, I noticed something strange in their quarterly reports. Numbers that didn't quite add up. Projects that seemed to be burning cash without corresponding revenue. Honestly, I was just curious. Didn't even connect it to my family at first because I review these reports for dozens of companies. When I dug deeper, well, let's just say my father's legacy isn't what everyone thinks it is. The company's been hiding losses for years, using accounting tricks that aren't technically illegal but are sketchy AF. Classic boomer management, looking good on paper while the foundation rots. So I started quietly acquiring shares. Not even to screw him over initially. It was just a good business opportunity. Undervalued company, fixable problems, potential for restructuring. But when that fucking invitation arrived, yeah, the plan changed. Back to Monday. By 8:30, board members started arriving. Old guys in suits looking confused about why there was an emergency meeting the day after the CEO's retirement party. My father, Colton, and Amara showed up at 8:45, walking in like they owned the place, which, LOL, they literally didn't anymore. Dad saw me at the head of the table and stopped dead. Colton bumped into him from behind. Amara's face went through like 5 emotions in 3 seconds. The reception committee, aka me. "Morning, Charles. Rough night? You look like shit." Dad started with the threats immediately. That I had no right to be there, that whatever I thought I was doing wouldn't work, that he'd have security remove me. Typical bluster. I just held up the shareholder documents and smiled. Actually, I'm exactly where I belong. As the largest individual shareholder of this company, I've called this emergency meeting to address some concerning issues with current management. The other board members were looking back and forth between us like they were at a tennis match. Dad tried to interrupt, but I kept going, explaining how I'd acquired my shares legally through various investment vehicles over the past 8 months. One of my lawyers passed out documentation to everyone present. Colton was frantically flipping through the papers, then whispering to Dad. As head legal counsel, he knew exactly how fucked they were. The share acquisition was 100% legal. Amara just glared at me like she was trying to set me on fire with her mind. Once the other board members understood what was happening, the real meeting began. I laid out what I'd found in my analysis. The hidden losses, the accounting tricks, the mismanagement that had been dragging down share value for years. Dad kept trying to spin it, talking about aggressive growth strategies and temporary market adjustments. But the numbers spoke for themselves. When I pulled up the chart showing how their stock had underperformed compared to industry averages for 5 straight years, even his allies on the board started looking concerned. Colton tried the legal angle, questioning whether I had conflicts of interest or had violated SEC regulations. My lawyers shut that down quick. Everything was above board, all disclosures filed properly. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I proposed a vote of no confidence in current management, suggesting the board consider new leadership to address the company's structural issues. Dad lost it. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward, slammed his fists on the table, and started shouting about family loyalty and how I'd always been jealous of him. Called me every name in the book, ungrateful, backstabber, failure. Said I was destroying his life's work because I couldn't hack it in his company. I just let him rant, Every word just proved my point about his unfitness to lead. When he finally ran out of steam, I calmly asked, "Are you finished with your tantrum? Or would you like to give the board more evidence of your emotional instability?" The vote was 7-3 in favor of removing him as CEO, effective immediately, as security escorted him out. Yeah, the same security he told would have my photo. He was still yelling that I'd regret this, that he'd find a way to take back what was his. After he left, I laid out my initial plans for restructuring. Nothing dramatic, just basic fixes for the most glaring issues. The remaining board members seemed relieved that I wasn't planning to gut the company. Some of them had probably suspected things weren't right for a while. Colton and Amara sat through it all with matching expressions of shock and hatred. When the meeting ended, Amara stormed out without a word. Colton stayed behind, trying to figure out his next move. He cornered me by the elevator, keeping his voice low but intense. Said I had no idea what I was doing, that Dad had built this company from nothing, that there were complexities I didn't understand. Then he switched to threatening me, said if I went through with this, he'd make sure everyone knew what really happened with my failed startup attempt years ago. That was interesting. I asked what he meant, and he smiled like he had me. Said Dad had been the one who scared off my initial investors back when I first tried to start my business after dropping out of the MBA program. Apparently, Dad had called in favors, spread rumors about my instability, and basically sabotaged me behind my back. I already suspected something like that had happened, but hearing Colton confirm it, man, the funny thing is, he thought this would hurt me or make me back down. Instead, it just confirmed I was doing exactly the right thing. I told him I'd see him at tomorrow's management meeting and that he might want to update his resume. The look on his face was priceless. When I got back to my office, I had 17 missed calls from my mother. I finally answered on her 18th attempt. She was crying, asking how I could do this to my father after everything he'd done for me. I asked what exactly he'd done, besides belittle me, sabotage my career, and publicly disown me. She got quiet, then admitted she'd known about Dad interfering with my first business. Said she'd tried to stop him, but you know how he gets. Classic enabler shit. Then she tried the guilt trip. Dad was devastated. His blood pressure was through the roof. This could literally kill him. I told her I'd spent 12 years building my business despite his sabotage. 12 years being the family disappointment while he told everyone I was a failure. 12 years hearing how I wasn't a real man because I didn't follow his path. She started to respond when I heard my father's voice in the background, demanding to know if she was talking to me. There was some muffled arguing, then Dad grabbed the phone from her. What followed was basically a 5-minute stream of threats and insults. The gist was that he'd fight this with everything he had, that he still had friends on the board, that I'd never be able to run his company. Then he said something that caught my attention, that I better pray I didn't find what I was looking for when I started digging into the company's finances. That was specific and concerning. After hanging up, I called my team and told them to do a deeper audit of the company books. If Dad was worried about something specific being found, I needed to know what it was before it blew up in my face. 2 hours later, one of my financial analysts called me back, sounding confused. He'd found a series of payments, large ones, going to offshore accounts over the past 3 years. Millions of dollars being funneled through subsidiaries and then disappearing. It looks like my father's legacy might be even more complicated than I thought. I've got my team working through the night to trace these payments. Whatever my father's been hiding, I'm going to find it. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about figuring out what the hell has been going on before it takes down the entire company. We'll update when I know more. Update 2. This week has been wild. I've barely slept since my last post. Running on energy drinks in spite at this point, LMAO. Had to wait to update because things have been happening so fast and I wanted to give you the full picture. So after finding those offshore payments in the company records, I brought in an outside auditing team to go through everything. Not cheap, but worth every penny. I told them to be discreet but thorough. Didn't want to cause panic among employees or tank the stock price before knowing what we were dealing with. Wednesday morning, I was in the middle of a Zoom call when my assistant messaged that my sister Amara was in the lobby demanding to see me. No appointment, just showed up with that entitled attitude she's always had. I told security to send her up. Might as well get this over with. She walked in like she owned the place, dropped her designer bag on my desk, and started in immediately about how I was destroying the family. Typical guilt trip shit. I kept working while she ranted, which only pissed her off more. When she finally ran out of steam, I asked if she knew about the offshore accounts. She hesitated just long enough that I knew she did. Then the backpedaling started. She claimed she'd only seen some paperwork, didn't know details, wasn't involved in financial decisions, blah blah blah. I pulled up the records we'd found so far on my screen and turned it toward her. There were 4 transfers with her electronic signature on them. Not Dad's, not Colton's, hers. She went from defensive to pale real quick, started with the excuses. Dad asked her to sign, she didn't know what they were for, she was just doing what he told her. Then switched to threatening me. Said if I made this public, it would destroy the company and everyone would lose their jobs. I just laughed and asked if she was really trying to use the employees as human shields. These were the same people she'd never bothered to learn the names of despite working there for 14 years. Then came the waterworks. She started crying about how she'd only ever tried to please Dad, how she'd worked twice as hard as anyone to prove herself, how it wasn't fair that I could just walk in and take over when she'd dedicated her life to the company. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered how she'd laughed when Dad called me defective at his party, how she'd been right there with them mocking me for years. Funny how quickly loyalty crumbles when consequences show up. I told her she had 2 choices: cooperate with the audit and tell me everything she knew, or clean out her desk. She looked at me like I'd slapped her, asked if I was seriously firing my own sister. I reminded her that she hadn't considered me family for years. Her words, not mine. After a minute, she cracked, told me it started 3 years ago. Dad had made some bad investments, needed to cover the losses before the board found out. The offshore accounts were supposedly temporary, just to move money around until they could fix the balance sheets. But then it kept happening. Every quarter, another adjustment needed. I asked who else knew. She said just Dad and Colton. And Mom. That surprised me. Mom had never been involved in the business side before. I sent Amara home, told her to take the rest of the week off while I figured out what to do. As she was leaving, she turned back and asked if I remembered the fishing trip when I was 13. Random question. I said yeah, of course. The infamous trip where Dad lost his shit because I didn't want to gut the fish I'd caught. She said, that wasn't about the fish. Dad had just found out his company was being passed over for a major contract. He'd been drinking all morning. The fish was just an excuse to take it out on someone. After she left, I sat there thinking about how many disappointments I'd supposedly caused that might have had nothing to do with me at all. How many times had Dad's failures become my fault? Thursday morning, I got a text from an unknown number. It was from Mom, saying she'd had to get a burner phone because Dad had been monitoring her regular one. She wanted to meet somewhere private. We agreed on a coffee shop across town. When I got there, she looked 10 years older than she had at the retirement party. She was fidgety, kept looking around like she was afraid Dad would walk in. I'd never seen her like this before. She started by apologizing, not just for the retirement party, but for everything. Said she should have stood up to Dad years ago, should have protected me more. I asked why she never did. She took out her phone, pulled up a photo, and slid it across the table. It was her face from maybe 15 years ago, with a bruise around her eye that definitely wasn't from walking into a door like she'd told everyone at the time. Dad's temper wasn't just verbal, apparently. It had never been just about me. Mom had been walking on eggshells for decades, trying to manage his moods, trying to protect all of us kids in her own flawed way. I asked why she stayed. She gave the usual answers: financial dependence, fear, the kids. But then she told me something I never knew. Before I was born, she'd actually left him once, packed her bags, took Colton and Amara, who were little kids then, and went to her sister's house. Dad showed up 3 days later, all apologies and promises. When those didn't work, he threatened to ruin her financially, take the kids, destroy her reputation. She went back. A year later, she was pregnant with me. Dad had never wanted a 3rd child. Said 2 was enough. The perfect family? He resented my existence before I was even born. I just sat there trying to process this. My whole life, I'd thought Dad hated me because I wasn't good enough, because I didn't follow his path, because I was somehow defective. Turns out, he hated me because I represented a time when he almost lost control. Mom started crying, saying she was sorry she'd been so weak. I told her it wasn't her fault. She shook her head and said that wasn't all of it. She knew about the offshore accounts, had accidentally found some paperwork years ago. Dad made her sign an NDA and told her to forget what she'd seen. As we were talking, my phone kept buzzing with texts from Colton, increasingly angry messages demanding I call him immediately. I ignored them until Mom left, then called him back. He was livid. Apparently, the auditors had shown up at his office and started requesting files. He'd refused, saying they had no authority. I informed him that as acting CEO, I had every authority to initiate an audit, and his refusal could be seen as obstruction. He called me every name in the book, then tried a different approach. Said he wanted to work with me, that we could fix this situation together without outsiders involved. Classic Colton, always looking for the angle that benefits him. I told him it was too late for that. The audit was happening with or without his cooperation. He got quiet for a second, then said, "You don't want to do this, Rick. There are things you don't understand." I asked what exactly I didn't understand. He hung up. Friday morning, I woke up to a series of notifications. Someone had leaked to a company group chat that we were under audit. The office was in chaos. I rushed in to find people panicking, rumors flying about layoffs and criminal charges. I called an all-hands meeting to calm things down. Explained that yes, we were conducting an audit, but it was a standard procedure when new leadership takes over. Said no one's job was at risk unless they'd personally committed fraud. People seemed reassured. Went back to work. As I was walking back to my office, I saw Colton by the elevator. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He motioned for me to follow him into an empty conference room. Once the door closed, he dropped the tough guy act. Said he needed to show me something, pulled out a USB drive. It contained emails going back 5 years, correspondence between Dad and members of the board, discussing how to hide losses, inflate numbers, and basically cook the books. I asked why he was showing me this. He said because Dad was planning something desperate. He'd been on the phone all night with his old friends on the board, trying to rally support for an emergency vote to remove me. He was willing to burn everything down rather than let me win. Colton said he'd finally realized how toxic Dad's influence had been on all of us. Said he'd spent his whole career trying to please someone who was never satisfied, and look where it had gotten him, complicit in potential financial crimes. I wasn't sure whether to believe his sudden change of heart. Asked why he'd always taken Dad's side against me. He laughed, a bitter, empty sound. Said I was the lucky one. I got to leave, to build something of my own. He and Amara had been trapped in Dad's shadow, competing for approval that never came. As he was leaving, he told me to check my personal email. He'd forwarded something I needed to see. It was an email chain from 12 years ago, when I was first trying to start my business. Dad had written to his network explicitly telling them not to invest in my doomed venture and questioning my mental stability. Some of the responses were people declining to get involved, but others were actively agreeing to help sabotage me. Names I recognized. People who'd smiled to my face at family events for years while knowing they'd help destroy my dreams. People who'd been at that retirement party, laughing at Dad's jokes about his defective son. I forwarded the emails to my lawyers. Not sure what I'm going to do with them yet, but options are good. Saturday morning, I was at the gym trying to clear my head when I got an urgent call from the head of security at the company. Dad had shown up at the office, used his old key card, which apparently still worked, someone's getting fired for that, and was going through files in his former office. By the time I got there, he'd filled 2 boxes with documents and was working on a third. Security was standing awkwardly in the doorway, unsure what to do with the former CEO. I told him to wait outside and close the door. Asked Dad what he thought he was doing. He didn't even look up, just kept grabbing folders. Said these were his personal files, none of my business. I took out my phone and started recording. Told him that removing company documents could be considered theft at this point. He finally looked at me, with this weird, empty smile that gave me chills. Said I had no idea what game I was playing, that I was a child trying to run with the big dogs. I asked directly about the offshore accounts. Instead of denying it, he laughed. Said every successful business had ways of optimizing their finances, and if I didn't understand that, I'd never last in this industry. The conversation quickly deteriorated. He started ranting about how I'd never appreciated what he'd built, how I'd thrown away every advantage he'd tried to give me, how I'd always been a disappointment from day one. I just kept recording as he dug himself deeper, admitting to more and more in his rage. Finally, he stopped, seemed to realize what he was doing, demanded I delete the recording. I declined. He lunged across the desk at me, trying to grab my phone. I stepped back, but he kept coming. Knocked over a chair, sent papers flying. For a second, I saw what Mom must have seen all those years. The mask completely gone, just pure rage. He grabbed my shirt, shoved me against the wall. Security heard the commotion and rushed in, pulling him off me. As they escorted him out, he was still yelling that this wasn't over, that he had one more card to play, that by Monday I'd regret ever crossing him. I didn't think much of it. Seemed like empty threats from a desperate man. But then Sunday evening, my lawyer called. Dad had apparently spent the weekend contacting major clients, telling them to pull their business, not just suggesting it, outright threatening them with exposure of old arrangements if they continued working with the company under my leadership. And here's the kicker. He's called an emergency shareholder meeting for tomorrow morning, claims to have proxy votes from enough minor shareholders to challenge my control. I don't know if he really has the votes or if it's a bluff, but I've spent the last 6 hours preparing for war. Whatever he's planning, I'll be ready. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about stopping him before he destroys the livelihood of hundreds of employees just to get back at me. Whatever it takes, I'm not backing down. We'll update after tomorrow's showdown. This is going to get ugly. Final update. Okay, so I'm finally ready to give the final update on this whole insane situation. Sorry for disappearing for a week, but things got intense AF and I needed to focus. Plus, my legal team advised me to stop posting details online until certain things were resolved. So, the morning of the emergency shareholder meeting, I got to the building at 6 a.m. Wanted to do a final prep session with my team before the shit show started. The auditors had been working around the clock and had compiled a preliminary report. Nothing official enough for legal action yet, but definitely enough to raise serious concerns with the board. When I pulled into the parking garage, I noticed my father's Mercedes already there, which was weird considering the meeting wasn't until 9. I texted Julian to keep an eye on the security feeds to see what Dad was up to. Turns out he'd brought in 3 of his old board allies and they were huddled in a conference room going through documents. Whatever last-minute scheme they were cooking up, I wasn't about to let it blindside me. I headed straight there. When I walked in, all 4 of them looked up like teenagers caught smoking behind the gym. Dad recovered first, putting on that fake smile he uses when he's cornered. Asked if I was ready to end this foolishness and hand back control of his company. I just laughed and told them the meeting room was ready whenever they were done with their little strategy session. As I was leaving, one of the board members, Thompson, this old guy who'd been Dad's golf buddy for like 20 years, stopped me, asked if we could talk privately for a minute. I was suspicious but agreed. Once we were alone, Thompson looked nervous as hell. Said he'd known my father for decades. Thought he knew what kind of man he was. But the stuff he'd been hearing the past few days had him worried. Asked point blank if I had evidence of financial misconduct. I didn't confirm or deny, just asked why he was suddenly concerned. He admitted Dad had approached him about using his proxy votes to help remove me, but had been vague about the reasons. Something felt off to him. I told Thompson he should vote his conscience, but that everything would become clear at the meeting. As I walked away, I realized Dad's allies might not be as solid as he thought. By 8:45, the main boardroom was filling up. Shareholders, board members, key executives. My mother slipped in at the last minute, sitting in the back corner. Dad acted like he didn't see her. Colton came in with a stack of folders, looking sleep-deprived and stressed. Amara was already seated, typing furiously on her phone. Dad had arranged his supporters on one side of the room. They were all old guard types who'd been with the company forever. My side was a mix of board members who'd voted with me before, plus the independent auditors and my legal team. At exactly 9 a.m., I called the meeting to order, started by addressing the elephant in the room, that this emergency session had been called by the former CEO in an attempt to reverse the previous vote of no confidence. Dad immediately jumped in, claiming I'd misled the board, that I had a personal vendetta that was clouding my judgment, that I was making rash decisions that threatened the company's stability. The usual bullshit, but delivered with that confident tone that had intimidated people for decades. I let him talk. Let him dig himself deeper, with promises about how he'd restore stability and put the company back on its proven path to success. When he finally sat down, looking smug as hell, I thanked him for his input, then nodded to my assistant who started distributing copies of the preliminary audit report. As people started flipping through the pages, the room got real quiet. Dad tried to object, saying this so-called audit wasn't on the agenda and shouldn't be considered. I reminded him that as current CEO, I had full authority to commission financial reviews, and that transparency should be welcome if there was nothing to hide. I gave everyone 10 minutes to review the key findings. The auditors had identified 26 suspicious transactions over 3 years, totaling nearly $12 million. Money that had been moved through a series of offshore accounts and shell companies before disappearing. When I started the discussion again, I kept it clinical, focused on the financial irregularities rather than making accusations. Asked if anyone could explain these transactions. All eyes turned to my father. He tried to dismiss it as creative accounting and standard industry practices. Said every company had ways of optimizing their tax situation, but the room wasn't buying it. These weren't tax loopholes. This was money just gone. One of the older board members asked directly, "Where did the money go?" Dad fumbled, saying it had been reinvested in exploratory ventures that hadn't paid off yet. Complete bullshit. I nodded to the head auditor who pulled up bank records showing transfers from the offshore accounts to personal accounts in the Caymans. Accounts with my father's name on them. Dad's face went from confident to panicked real fast. He stood up, started shouting that this was a setup, that I was framing him, that these documents were fake, lost his shit completely, knocked over his chair, slammed his fist on the table. That's when Colton, of all people, stood up. The room went quiet again. He looked at Dad, then at me, then back at Dad. Said he couldn't do this anymore. Opened one of his folders and started distributing more documents. Internal memos and emails showing Dad had been planning these transfers for years. Had been systematically siphoning company funds while hiding losses from the board. Dad looked like he'd been shot. Kept saying Colton's name over and over, like he couldn't believe what was happening. Then he lunged at him, actually tried to grab the documents out of his hands. Knocked over a water pitcher, shoved a board member who tried to intervene. Security had to come in and restrain him. As they were escorting him out, he was still yelling, calling Colton a traitor, saying he'd regret this, that none of us understood what he'd sacrificed for this company. After that chaos, we took a 30-minute recess. People needed to process what they'd just witnessed. I found Colton in an empty office, staring out the window, asked him why he'd done it. He didn't look at me, just said he was tired. Tired of lying, tired of covering for Dad, tired of being someone he didn't respect. When the meeting reconvened, the vote wasn't even close. 37-4 in favor of maintaining the current leadership, me, and authorizing a full investigation into the financial irregularities. Dad's last-ditch effort had backfired spectacularly. As people were leaving, Amara approached me. She looked different, less polished than usual, more human somehow. Said she wanted to talk about her role in all this. I told her we'd discuss it tomorrow. Too much had happened today already. She nodded, then hesitated. Said there was something I should know about the retirement party. The whole no losers allowed thing and the X through my face on the invitation, that hadn't been Dad's idea. It had been hers. She'd thought it would score points with him, show her loyalty. I didn't know what to say to that, just nodded and walked away. Some betrayals are too personal to process on the spot, you know? That evening, I went to my parents' house. Not to confront Dad or anything. He wasn't even there. Had apparently packed a bag and left right after the meeting. I went to talk to Mom. She was sitting in the kitchen, drinking tea like it was any normal day. When she saw me, she just pointed to the chair across from her. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, she asked if I was going to press charges. I said I hadn't decided yet. The audit was still ongoing, and my legal team was reviewing options. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. Then she told me something I never knew. The reason Dad had always been so hard on me specifically wasn't just about me being the unwanted third child or refusing to join his company. It was because I reminded him of his own father, a man who'd walked away from a secure job to start his own business, failed miserably, and left his family struggling. Dad had grown up poor because of his father's selfish dreams, had worked his ass off to build something stable, something he thought would last generations. When I rejected that stability to chase my own path, it triggered something deep in him, made him feel like his own father was laughing at him from the grave. Doesn't excuse a damn thing he did, but it explains some things I'd never understood. Mom asked what would happen to the company now. I told her the truth. It would survive, but not without changes. Too many people depended on their jobs there for me to let it fail because of Dad's actions. As I was leaving, she handed me an envelope, said Dad had left it on his desk. Inside was a handwritten letter. Just 3 lines. I built this. You took it. Now break it if you want, but remember, you're more like me than you think. Typical Dad, trying to have the last word, trying to plant doubt. But for the first time, his words didn't get under my skin. I'd spent so many years defining myself in opposition to him. Maybe there was some truth to what he wrote. We're both stubborn, both willing to go all in on what we believe. But I'd use those traits differently. That's what mattered. Over the next few days, things moved fast. The full audit confirmed what we already knew. Dad had been stealing from the company for years. The board voted to pursue legal action. Arrest warrants were issued, but Dad had already left the country. Last we heard, he was in some non-extradition country, living off his hidden millions. Colton resigned from his position, but agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. I didn't fight it. Too much bad blood there to work together effectively. He's talking about starting his own practice, something completely separate from the family legacy. Amara surprised me by asking to stay. Said she wanted to make things right, to be part of rebuilding what Dad had damaged. I wasn't sure at first, but eventually agreed to give her a 6-month probationary period. Trust takes time. Mom filed for divorce. 38 years of marriage ended with a stack of papers delivered by courier. She's staying with her sister while looking for her own place. As for the company, it's surviving. We've had to be transparent with major clients about what happened, reassure employees, deal with a short-term stock hit. But the fundamentals are sound. Without Dad's financial shell games dragging us down, we're actually in a stronger position than before. I still go into his old office sometimes, sit in his chair, look at the view he had for 40 years. Not out of sentimentality, just to remind myself that empires built on lies eventually crumble, no matter how solid they seem. The strangest part of all this, I don't feel the satisfaction I expected. Taking over the company was never about running it long-term. It was about proving I could, about showing him he was wrong about me. Now that I've done that, I'm not sure what comes next. For now, I'm focused on stabilizing things, making sure the employees don't suffer for Dad's crimes. After that, we'll see. Maybe I'll sell my shares once the legal issues are resolved. Go back to my own company, the one I built without his name or his money or his approval. That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't fix what was broken, doesn't heal old wounds. But it does change the story. I'm no longer the family failure, the defective son, the loser who couldn't cut it. I'm the one who stayed while he ran, the one who's cleaning up his mess, the one who beat him at his own game. And sometimes, that's enough.